Hello, and welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. On the show this week, I'm talking to Nadeine Asbali about her new book, Veiled Threat, on being visibly Muslim in Britain. In her book, Nadeine addresses the myriad experiences of Muslim hijabi women and the many different facets of racism, misogyny, and Islamophobia experienced. Being a mixed-race child, her father is Libyan and her mother is white English, Nadeine often passed as just an ordinary white kid until she started to wear the hijab, when everything changed. In this episode, we took all about her book, about Islamophobia, the pitfalls of white liberal feminism, the criminalisation of Muslim identity in Britain, and so much more. Nadeine Asbali is a British Muslim writer and a secondary school teacher living in East London. Growing up with an English mother and a Libyan father in an overwhelmingly white town and deciding to wear the hijab as a teenager are experiences that have shaped the trajectory of her life and her writing. They have formed the foundations of a freelance writing career that explores the themes of identity, social policy, racism, and Islamophobia for national and international publications, including The Guardian, theNew, Arab and Glamour. Nadeine is also a Metro columnist and regularly writes about schools and education policy, specialising in how Muslim and ethnic minority pupils are represented by the British education system. Now, before we get on with today's episode, I just want to remind you that you can help support the show. Come and join me on Patreon and join my community. When you subscribe, you could get access to an exclusive podcast episode every single month directly to your inbox only. You'd really be helping me to put more episodes like this out into the world. Now, on with the show. Hello Nadeine, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf. It is so lovely to have you on the show. How are you doing?
Alaikum salam. Thank you so much for having me. I'm good, thank you. I'm excited to chat to you.
And huge congratulations, because your book, Veiled Threat, has just been out in the world just for a few weeks. So a really exciting start to 2024 for you, but a huge feat in getting a book published, and one that is so important and I think so relevant and insightful as well. So congratulations. How has it been having your book out in the world?
Thank you so much. It's been quite surreal, really, because obviously it's something that I've spent the last 2 years working on, and I've just seen it in draft form in random apps on my phone and in bits and pieces. So seeing it as an actual physical book and then in readers' hands and on bookshelves has been really surreal, but alhamdulillah, it's a really nice feeling.
Physically, it can't be missed. It is a fluorescent green, which I absolutely love. I love the fact that it is so visible, because it reflects, I guess, what you're trying to talk about, which is the visibility of Muslim women and how the hijab makes you a very visible Muslim woman. So tell me a little bit about how you got to writing this book. What was your journey to writing Veiled Threat?
So I suppose the story itself is my life story. So it's everything I've experienced since just before my 15th birthday. So 15 years ago now. So it was kind of always in me, and I think I always, I studied English at uni, and then I trained to be an English teacher. Writing is something I've always been drawn to, but I always kind of felt as though before I could write anything else, I needed to write this book, almost to get all of those, almost to unpick everything that I've experienced. And I think it was really cathartic writing it. But I mean, to be honest, I kind of just had a far-fetched dream. One day I was going to write a book, and I didn't really think it would ever happen. But when I was on maternity leave about 2 years ago now, I had started to write articles, and an agent reached out to me after reading my articles and said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, I think about it all the time." And then she walked me through it, basically. So we just it went from there. So alhamdulillah, it was it was something that had been within me for years and then suddenly kind of happened quite quickly, but alhamdulillah.
So, I mean, it sounds like it happened very quickly. And actually the book, you know, some of the examples that you use and you talk about the ongoing war in Gaza, like it is very like recent, and so it feels like it all happened very quickly. But when it came to you thinking about exactly what book you wanted to write, what were you really interested in talking about?
I think I wanted to put something in people's hands that really gets to the heart of like all the complexities of what it's like to be a Muslim woman in Britain. Because there might be things out there that deal with one element of it, but I don't think I've come across anything that's dealt with all of those multifaceted, competing kind of challenges at once. I wanted it to be a visibly Muslim woman who wrote it, because I feel like so often when Muslim women are spoken about, so when there'll be, you know, a debate about the hijab on like a talk show or something, they might invite someone who's a Muslim but maybe not visibly Muslim, or, you know, if they're debating the niqab, they'll very rarely have hijabi on. So I wanted to kind of tell it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and to use my own personal experiences through all the different stages of my life to then kind of delve into like the politics behind it. So I suppose so that my kind of fellow visibly Muslim women would feel heard, but also so that non-Muslims or non-visibly Muslim women would know what it's like to be bombarded from all sides and from all angles.
That's really interesting, and it is multifaceted. You write about a whole host of things and different elements of being a Muslim woman in the UK, and sort of, I guess, also like the different arms of Islamophobia and misogyny and where they all come from and how it can impact a person. But let's start with your story. So you are of mixed race heritage. Your father is Libyan, I believe. And your mother is white. And so you write in the book about how basically as a child, unknowingly you were passing as just white. Although there was, you know, like a little bit of confusion about your surname, because Nadeine is a name that is not particularly foreign sounding. But Asbali is, right? Asbali is. And so what was it like for you sort of having the awakening when you did, that you are considered the other, that you are not actually white like your English peers like Sally and Lucy and whoever else?
It's hard to put it into words. I think on the one hand it was a shock to know that as soon as I became visibly other, it wasn't this like novelty anymore. Growing up, me and my brother were always, especially because we were in a small primary school in a white town, it was like a novelty, like, oh, their dad's Libyan. It was like, you know, just like someone can, you know, has a million pets at home. It was like a kind of fact. And then I suppose it hadn't occurred to me until I made myself visibly other that, oh wait, people are not going to find this like an amusing kind of fact anymore. If anything, it's now going to come to define everything about me. And I still find it so striking because my brother can, you start a new job and they make you say a little icebreaker fact about yourself, and he'll say, oh, I'm half Libyan, and everyone's really shocked. I'm like, oh wow, really? And I say it and they're like, well, obviously you're something, right? It's just, I suppose it was a real shock to know that it wasn't a novelty anymore. I think it was really confusing because I suppose it wasn't something I had ever had to question, which was a privilege, right? Because I was privileged to be able to not, people who are grappling other kind of are, from other minorities don't have that privilege from birth. But I was kind of sheltered up until the age of 15 to some extent because I could just pass as white, and people might say, oh, where's your surname from? But that was about it. A real shock, and it changed everything overnight, like I talk about in the book.
So it's interesting because I have nieces, and and I don't really remember how I felt when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I don't really remember what I thought about my identity and my race. But some of my conversations with my nieces, especially when they have been younger, and I mean kind of like maybe like 6, 7, I mean, oh, but you know, we're from London, or we're British, or you know, we're not brown, especially because my nieces are quite fair skinned. I mean, we're Pakistani, but they're quite fair skinned. And so they're just like, oh, but you know, I just remember my littlest niece at one point, she was like, well, I'm not a Pakistani, I'm Londonese. And I found it hilarious because obviously she made up a word. But it's interesting that, and it wasn't so much, she still looks Pakistani, even though she is of light skin, but you can tell that she's not white. But I found it so interesting how you don't perceive yourself as the other always. And it can, and I guess part of it depends on your environment and how maybe if you grow up in a town that is very white, and you just kind of blend in. But maybe if there's more people that look like you, and maybe if, I don't really know, like if it depends also whether or not there is more multiculturalism, if that brings out difference, or does it just make it acceptable? I wonder, like, what your thoughts on that are.
It's interesting because I've really noticed it through teaching in Northampton and then teaching in East London. Sorry. When I first started teaching in Northampton, I would have like a few Muslim students, and they really reminded me of myself when I was a teenager. Like very kind of uncomfortable, very aware of the fact that they're a minority, very conscious to like try and fit in as much as possible, would be really nervous about doing things like praying at school or talking about the fact they're fasting. And then I moved to East London and I was so blown away with how confidently British the kids are here. And like it reminds me of your nieces because they'll just say they're from London, like from, and they don't even have to think about it. And yet still almost at the age of 30, I'm like I have to say, oh, do you mean ethnicity? Do you mean town? Do you mean? It's really nice to see. But I think London is quite a bubble in that sense. Like I think the kids growing up here do just feel like they're from London because it's so normal for almost everyone, I suppose, especially like the younger generation has some kind of other ethnicity in them, so it's quite normal for them. But yeah, I think my experience of growing up where I was I felt like I was one of the only ones who was different, was that it made me feel really kind of hyper aware of it. And I think there's a comfort in being somewhere multicultural because you feel like we're all an other, so therefore none of us are other, right? Yeah.
So I just want to talk a little bit about that moment that you you started wearing the hijab. So I was a similar age to when you started wearing it. I started wearing it, I was like 15, 16. I think I just finished my GCSEs. And for me, like my whole family is Pakistani, and some people wear hijab and some people don't. Some of my relatives, even my mom, will just wear dupatta. Like, it's just different. I never felt that either I should or I shouldn't from that perspective. But I'd gotten to the point where I had just started reading like quite a bit of Muslim literature. I'd made some new friends. Because I started to think a little bit more about going to university and like exploring things, what that was going to look like and all of those sort of things. So I decided one day also just like, what, I want to wear the hijab now. And I feel like I didn't have like a huge, like, it wasn't like a huge like spiritual thing that was like, no, Islam tells me I have to wear it and I have to wear it right now. I just felt like within me that this was the right thing that I wanted to do. I can't really explain it. I don't know if your experience with that is similar. And I grew up in London and I very much felt a change. It wasn't massive, but whereas before I had felt kind of like a little bit more accepted and part of the furniture of the school. I was always kind of like giving talks and taking people around tours around the school, and I was very much an ambassador. And then I put on the hijab and I just felt a resistance. I just felt a little bit of people pulling back, especially teachers, not so much my classmates, but more teachers kind of like pulling back, treading with caution. And it made me feel so uncomfortable, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. And this happened obviously like quite a few years after post 9/11. In terms of like the height of Islamophobia, we weren't at what I would call like the peak of it, but it was just very strange instances of outright Islamophobia or racism. But there was definitely a shift. Actually, until maybe like a year and a half later, when I was applying for university, we had this careers advisor who just, I mean, I don't want to speak ill of anybody, but I just, I just feel like maybe that wasn't the right job for her. But I had decided to apply to Cambridge, and she basically told me that maybe I would get in on the diversity card. It was horrible. It was really horrible. But even then, I still couldn't figure out exactly like why that was so harsh, because what she had said was, yeah, maybe they'll get in because they won't have enough applicants that look like you. So she didn't say because you're brown, because you're Muslim, because you wear hijab, but she said because there weren't enough applicants that look like you, which is really difficult, I think, as a teenager to kind of deal with. Well, what does that mean, and what are the implications of that? What can I do about this? I just kind of pretended that it never happened and moved on because I didn't know what else I could do in that instance. But I just remember it being just this very strange experience, and I just wondered if you could talk about what it was like for you when because you were on holiday when you decided that you wanted to wear hijab and you'd come back wearing the hijab. So what was that like, and that change for you?
I think so. I think I had internally been considering it for a while without realizing that I had. So I think like I kind of the hijab because I had tried to be white and I felt like, okay, that hadn't worked. And then I felt like my next step was actually to try and be Libyan. So I remember we had I went to a girls' school and there were a pair of sisters in a few years above me who were also half Libyan, half English. And I remember I would try and in school, like a year 11 is never going to be friends with a little year 8, but I used to try and like stand near them where in this place where we'd all wait to be picked up in the hope that I might make friends with them. And I thought, okay, I'll be Libyan and I'll like find some kind of Libyan friends. And then that just didn't work either. So then I think I kind of then went towards, okay, let me be Muslim. And you know how in school everyone's like a little clique, and there was like the Muslim group, and I kind of thought in my head, okay, I'll go and join them. And I think I kind of thought of the hijab as like my ticket to that. But then, so that was kind of like during the year leading up to it. And then I went to Libya for the summer like we always did. And I just, like, it sounds quite, I don't know, cheesy or cliche, but one day I just woke up and just felt like putting it on, and nobody had said anything to me, nobody had suggested it. And if anything, so I went to my cousin whose house I was staying at and said I want to put on the hijab, and then she got this like beautiful purple scarf and wrapped it around my head. And that day all my cousins took me hijab shopping, and I bought like a few of my first hijabs. So then I was in Libya for the next couple of weeks wearing it, and there it was like a bubble. Not all the women wear it, but a lot of the women wear it. Everyone was like happy and like congratulating me and giving me like chocolates and like money because I'd started wearing it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so nice. I've been welcomed into this like elite club. I don't know, I felt like special, you know. And then I got to Heathrow, and it was just so me and my brother used to travel back from Libya on our own, because we'd go as a family, and then my mum and dad would come back for work, and me and my brother would stay with all my family there, and then we'd come back on our own. So it was just me and him going through security, and I just felt it. It was like a smack in the face. Traveling through Heathrow, I was still a kid. I was only 14, like just before my 15th birthday, and everyone was just so hostile to me and like really questioning where we'd been, why why we'd gone there, and they like separated me and my brother, and he looked very English, like blonde, not brown hair, blue eyes, white skin, and they just separated us, and I was taken into this room, and this woman was like prodding through my scarf and like telling me to take it off and like checking under my ponytail, and I just felt so like it was just such a clear message that this is Britain and this is not how you dress here, and if you're going to dress like that here, we're going to make it difficult for you. And then like going to school and everything wearing it, I just felt it's like you described it. You can't even. It's hard to put it into words, and it's hard to explain it to someone who hasn't felt it. But it's just like a shift. It's like the ground has shifted underneath you, and you're not, and everything's kind of distorted. Like all my teachers would just act kind of differently to me, like slightly hostile, or like I really remember I wrote about this in the book because it was such a like knock to my self-confidence. But it was my first lesson, my first day back of the school year, and my favorite teacher, who had like I had been her star pupil, and she looked at me and she said, "Rukhsana, go and sit over there," because she just saw the hijab and she just thought I was the only other Muslim girl in the class. And I was like, wow, she didn't even look at my face. Like it was just such a shock. And then teachers would just say weird things to me like, "Oh, I didn't know your dad was one of the ones who made you wear that." And I felt like I had been their kind of good, palatable, vaguely mixed race child, and now suddenly I was this like visibly Muslim thing, and it just changed everything. And it's really hard to, even now I'll be like with my mum in public, because obviously she's English, I'll be like, "Oh, that woman was really racist to me," and she'll be like, "Really?" Like it's hard for people to pick up on it when it's not at them. And yeah, I could really tell from the way she was looking at me or the way she spoke to me. But yeah, it really changes everything about how you're perceived in public.
Yeah, absolutely. But what about the other side? Because I think, it is putting on the hijab and becoming visibly Muslim in that way. To non-Muslims, I think especially, it does change the way that they behave. But what about the community of Muslims and other hijabis? Like, what has been your experience? Did you find a greater sisterhood when you started wearing the hijab? Like, what's that been like for you?
It's funny because the immediate reaction of the girls in my school, who I had like secretly been trying to be friends with, they were like, they thought I was just like pulling a prank. They thought I was just like a white girl who was just wearing a hijab, I don't know, a social experiment or something. And I was so crushed by that because that's why I think like it didn't solve everything about my identity crisis, because I realized that I'll always be too brown for my white side and too English whatever for my brown side.
Yeah.
They just thought like I was just Billy, or I don't know what they thought, but they didn't think I was actually Muslim and actually wearing the hijab. But eventually, yeah, like I found friends at school who are Muslim, and like we started to pray together. And I think I noticed in public like that little, hijabi smile you give to another hijab tree. And yeah, and like I really noticed it when I got to university. I think because I was probably seeking out those Muslim spaces, I felt like a sisterhood then, and I do, I feel it now. I think it wasn't as immediate as I had hoped, but I definitely do feel it. And my closest friends are like a collection of the other fellow hijabis who have been in every context. Like the only other hijabi when I was training as a teacher, the only other hijabi on my course. It's like we've like collected each other through life.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say about seeking out Muslim spaces, because although like I grew up in London and I went to a girls' school and it was fairly multicultural and I had friends from all different backgrounds. So there weren't like I didn't have a ton of Muslim friends, but I had like, a decent number. And especially when I put on hijab, like a lot of them were already wearing hijab. And so it was quite nice. I felt like kind of my bonds with them did improve. But it was really when I went to university. So I did go to Cambridge. and I don't think I got in on the diversity class, but I hope I did it anyway. But I did go to Cambridge, alhamdulillah, and I just remember, like, before I went, I had this idea that I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go what we call mainstream, right? I'm gonna join like the university-wide debating society and the university-wide student union, and I'm not gonna get massively involved in the Islamic society because like it's great that it's there, and I'm gonna go to the events, but what I really want to do is I really want to like build myself, and I want to make the connections, and I want to like I want to do that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but gosh, when I got there, I was like, oh no, I need those Muslim spaces. I just remember in the first week, I was so overwhelmed by the sheer number of people that did not look like me and looked at me just with like a complexity on their face. I know there were many people that I met. I was the first Muslim they were speaking to.
Yeah.
I was the first woman in hijab that they were having a conversation with, and I just couldn't. I couldn't handle it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a bit too much. And I sought out the ISOC.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very grateful for it. I'm very grateful for it because I felt safe. I just felt safe and seen and looked after, and I found friends and community. And that doesn't mean that like I didn't do things outside of the ISOC and I didn't have friends. Obviously, of course I did. But that Muslim space was so anchoring throughout my entire university experience. And I was very involved with the Islamic Society. And yeah, I could have given less time there and given more time to other things. And perhaps that may have helped me professionally if I had done that. But what I needed to feel myself, and I needed to feel safe. And I didn't want to be constantly having to justify why I'm not going out drinking, why I'm not doing this, why I don't really want to go and sit in the pub, even if I'm not going to be drinking, and all of these. I didn't want to constantly be having these conversations. I found them very tiring. And I just wanted to be able to be myself. And I think that was the biggest thing for me in finding those spaces, was that they felt safe, and they felt like, and there were a whole range of people, whole range of Muslims, a whole range of experiences and different kind of degrees of religiosity, if you like. And I love that. I didn't also have to be somebody that was, like completely in line with faith practices, and it was okay if I was sloppy, and it was okay if I wasn't doing things, and I didn't have to pretend to be somebody I wasn't.
Yeah.
And that was just so, like, I'm so grateful for that space, and I'm so glad to see that Islamic societies are still operating the same, and I think they're getting better and like just more inclusive as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So you write in the book about the different ways that Muslim women, and especially like hijabi Muslim women, deal with Islamophobia, misogyny, patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
But you also write about the pitfalls of white liberal feminism.
Yeah.
I wanted to take a moment just to talk about the hypocrisy of the white feminist movement, especially with the case of Iran versus hijab bans in France, but also about the silence that we are hearing from white feminist liberal spaces around what we are witnessing in Gaza at the moment. I just wonder what your thoughts on that are.
I mean, the silence is deafening, and I think the double standards could not be clearer. And I think I'm not glad for their silence, but in a way, I'm glad that I think it's opening people's eyes to how actually disinterested white liberal feminism is in Muslim women's liberation or safety or existence. Like we are quite literally only there. We only even come into their minds when it fulfills their own aims, right? So when, like, that image of a Muslim woman taking her hijab off and burning it in the street in Iran is so perfect for the white liberal feminist kind of agenda. Why we saw, women shaving their heads in protest, women crying on Instagram about it, all these massive feminist platforms showing their solidarity, and And yet, as soon as the exact opposite happens, as soon as Muslim women are trying to fight for their right to cover, they don't care anymore. And that's why in the book I really try and talk about how white liberal feminism is just an extension of white supremacy, and how all it does is it reproduces those same structures that we see in patriarchy, but instead of it being a man telling us to dress, it's a liberal white feminist telling us, oh no, that this stuff isn't a good feminist move, but if you take it off, then you are a good feminist. So, white feminism is only interested in taking over that role that men might have traditionally taken in patriarchy. So it's them who are controlling our bodies instead of men, and that doesn't serve us in any way. And with Palestine at the moment, it's just I feel like I don't even know what to say anymore about this silence. Like, it's just how can women giving birth in rubble, women having cesarean sections without anesthetic, women dying, like how can all of that not churn up something in the white feminist like movement? And the only answer is racism, because they don't see us as like woman enough for their attention. It's just, I think it just really exposes how kind of invested white feminism is in the wider kind of liberal agenda, and how it feeds into like colonialism and white supremacy. And it's just I think they've exposed themselves as serving no purpose for Muslim women anymore.
Yeah, I think the problem is that like white liberal feminism for so long has just been kind of like told or put itself forward as just feminism. It's just mainstream feminism. If you are feminist, this is what you prescribe to and this is what you do. But actually it is just a faction, really. It is not representative of everybody. It is not inclusive, and it actually comes with already predetermined stereotypes in mind. It comes with with racist ideas, with even like patriarchal ideas already there, and just seems to be working around them. And it's really harmful, very, very harmful. I'm like you, like I don't understand how any feminist movement, regardless of what it will call itself, can look at what's happening in Gaza, in Palestine, where, like you said, women are having to give birth without any kind of medication and having cesarean without anesthetic, and are losing their children in front of them, are being murdered so brutally. How that doesn't become an issue, a feminist issue, like it just doesn't make any sense to me. And it just kind of reminds us that like they don't have our back, right? Like, unfortunately, like not all spaces are for us, which is just, honestly, like I just can't. And I think as well, like the hypocrisy around Iran, like you're right, the burning of the hijab is such like I don't know, like it's such a powerful statement that I have felt. I have such confused feelings, I think, around Iran generally, but it's also, that's very harmful for people like me and you. If we're championing the burning of the hijab, but at the same time we are not supporting people who want to wear the hijab. And you can do both. You can say, if you don't want to wear the hijab, you don't have to wear it. Don't wear it. Wear whatever you want. Of course, wear whatever you want. But equally, if you want to wear the hijab, then wear it. And here, feel safe to wear it. And that is not what is happening. It seems to be that, the burning of the hijab is considered revolutionary. But we know that for as long as time, women have been wearing whatever they want to wear. There have been women that have been wearing hijab, Muslim women that have been wearing hijab, and Muslim women that haven't been wearing hijab and have been holding all manner of positions in society historically, making massive change to communities, achieving so much, and it's not being determined by the clothes that they're wearing.
Yeah.
And it's just such a shame that it still feels so myopic. So what would do you have any, I don't know, like any advice or like any words of wisdom for like young Muslim women that are looking for spaces and looking for movements to be part of that champion for their own, well-being and empowerment, and for those around the world? What sort of things should we be looking out for, and where can we really find the safety that we need?
I think, like, building on what you said about Iran, and I think, like, white feminism's problem is that it doesn't have any interest in thinking Muslim women have a choice or like freedom or free will or whatever. So that's why, like, because it's so easy, like, it's not intellectually difficult to understand that a woman, like, you can support a woman choosing to wear the hijab, and you can support a woman choosing to not. Like, that's not a contradiction. But feminism sees it as a contradiction because they don't view the woman's choice as the main thing. They view the hijab as a patriarchal symbol, like the center of that issue. So I think that is why it is really no space for us as Muslim women. And I think a lot of Muslim women in the West go through that phase of I've certainly in the past tried to kind of make feminism, aka white feminism, work with my Muslimness, and I think actually it can't work because it's not built for us, and in fact it's built specifically to disclude us and to exclude us and to marginalize us, because for white feminism to thrive, it needs like a victim to save, and we are its victim, right? We are like its fodder. So that's why I think my advice would be to not try and make white feminism work for you as a Muslim woman, because it's never going to. I think in Islamic history and our Islamic beliefs, we have plenty of feminist figures, like people like Khadija radiallahu anha, who are far better to look up to than your liberal white feminist who just wants you to remove your hijab. And that doesn't mean like being stuck in the past and not kind of keeping times, but I think it's just acknowledging that, Islam is not, in many ways, Islam and the West are kind of feeling to me like they are increasingly incompatible, because the West is increasingly marginalizing us, right? Criminalizing our, us standing up for justice for our Palestinian brothers and sisters, criminalizing the way we dress, criminalizing things like us praying at school, or so I think my advice would be to not try to make Western ideals work for you as a Muslim, and to like seek your I don't know, your inspiration from like your faith. And I think that's something I wish I had learned sooner, because when I was at university I tried to be a feminist and to say like, oh, my hijab isn't because like God tells me to, it's because I'm just trying to reject the male gaze, and yeah, that's a part of it, rejecting the male gaze. But I think it's so unfashionable in our modern society to just say I do this because God asks me to, but actually we should like own that.
It's interesting what you say about how you feel that increasingly Islam is incompatible with the West. Do you think that's more because how do I say this? It's more because of the fact that the West doesn't want to, like, it's not open to any form of compatibility. It doesn't actually want it to be compatible, rather than the fact that it isn't. Because I think what is so difficult is the fact that everything is being criminalized. Our Muslim identities are being criminalized and erased constantly, and I think this goes for other minority communities as well. The West is extremely racist, so it's not like a Muslim issue only.
Yeah.
But definitely is a big issue with Muslims, because I think it's also important for Muslims living in the West, and I think especially like young British Muslims, to have a nuanced perspective of their identity and to feel somewhat okay and to feel somewhat stable. Because, you know, I you know, like you, like I was born in the UK. For me, this is home. And if I don't try and focus on it being home, I will have nowhere to go. And I think that that's part of the reason why so many of our generation and even the next generation is so anxious all the time, is because we don't feel that sense of acceptance. But I think trying to find it, and whether that is actually by traveling inward and turning to faith, but trying to find some sort of balance, I think is really important. It's hard. It's really hard to always feel like you do, like you're always too brown for Britain, but too white, or in my case, too British for Pakistan. Like I go to Pakistan. I lived there for 2 years, and I went very recently. And every time I go, I feel like I stick out like a sore thumb. And I can't, it's very tough. It's very tough.
I think it's interesting because I think, like, on the surface, you might think, okay, Britain's becoming more multicultural than ever. Like, there's more British Muslims now who are British, who feel British than there were in, like, our parents' generation. But I think the version of Muslimness that Britain accepts is, like, you can be Muslim on the outside. Yeah, you can have and you can have a Muslim name, but you need to be like a blank slate on the inside that we can shape as like a nation state. And I think I used to buy into this idea that, like, oh yeah, my Britishness and my Muslimness are like equal and they're totally compatible. But lately I just feel, and it is again with everything that's happening in Gaza, I feel like the West has proven itself incompatible with Islam because of like all that it stands for. Like, how can this nation like support and fund a genocide and criminalize anyone who speaks up against it? Like, if that is what this nation stands for, then I don't want to be compatible with it. Sorry. I don't want to be compatible with it, right? And I feel a bit of rejection. I think, to be honest, in the last few months, because of Palestine, I feel like I don't want to try and align myself with this nation that doesn't see anything wrong with almost 30,000 massacred Palestinians funded by our taxes and supported by our politicians. And I think Britain is also at the same time trying to make Islam incompatible, because then it feeds into its agenda of criminalizing us. Like, just a couple of weeks ago, the head of counter-terror policing acknowledged that everything that's happening in Palestine is like a radicalization moment, and like the Iraq War was for previous generations. But at the same time, they're acknowledging what their own policies are doing, but then like heightening their criminalization of us at the same time. Like, okay, you can acknowledge that your own policies are causing that disenfranchisement in us as Muslims, but then you're just using it as an excuse to heighten of us. So I feel like as a Muslim community, we're being pushed and pushed and pushed to a point where we can only be criminalized because the government or the state is trying to make us incompatible, so then it can criminalize our incompatibility, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a good few years that I've actually thought too much about how British I am or how British I feel. I think it was it was this like buzz conversation that was happening kind of like 2010 to 2015, I'd say. And after 2015, there's been a shift in narrative. I remember there was constantly, I went to so many panels about can you be British and Muslim, like, so I went to so many events. There were so many of these happening all of the time, right? And like you had different Muslims speaking on them. It was all this idea about how Muslim values are aligned with British values. But I do think that there has been this like shift in narrative, and I just don't, I haven't found that to be a particularly important or nuanced conversation. I think identity is so multi-layered and complex and individual as well, that almost conversations like that are almost irrelevant or just like invalid. Almost they don't seem to make a huge deal of sense anymore. But I really share your sort of disappointment and frustration, and also real worry about the future. Like, what does it mean for people like us, for our generation, for future generations of Muslims and of people of color? Like, what is going to happen to us? And I think one of the things that I have been feeling increasingly frustrated with, especially around Palestine and Gaza, is just a reminder of not just what Britain is doing now, but what Britain has done historically over hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
My family is Pakistani. We have been directly impacted by colonial rule and the absolute bloodshed and chaos that was caused in the region in the 1940s and in Palestine. Like, we cannot look at what is happening around the world right now without understanding what Britain and later what the US have done historically and continually historically as well. It wasn't as if they left and they learnt from it. They continued causing havoc and causing bloodshed and declaring wars and doing all kinds of horrible, horrible racist and Islamophobic things around the world. That is something I'm struggling with on a massive level at the moment, because I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with this frustration and this grief and some of this like anger almost that's coming out, because I don't know, and I don't think really there is an answer. But I think educating ourselves about it is also important, because if we understand what happened, we have a better understanding of what's going on right now. And that gives us an understanding of what could happen in the future, but also what we really need to do now.
Yeah.
I mean, I still can't believe that we are over 4 months into this war on Gaza and there has not been a ceasefire called. So I'm just beyond devastated, where like 30,000 people have been killed so far. And just over the last few days at time of recording, the intense attacks on Rafah, where we have over 1.2 million people have been sent. It's just, I can't, there's actually there's no words for it. I don't understand it. Like, I don't understand why it's not being stopped. I understand some of the larger agendas for sure, but like this bloodshed, like I just don't understand how in our world today, in our quote unquote free world today, where, it's 2024, where we're seeing this play out in the way that it's playing out, and people have the ability to like switch off. If the founder of Twitter was like, I'm gonna pull my services in Israel and I'm gonna pull my services in the United States, it's one decision for him to make, but it could have massive consequences and could achieve so much. But those things are not being done at the moment. So very tough. Very tough.
I think like the most alarming thing is that all this confusion and anger we're feeling, like obviously I'm a secondary school teacher and I teach a lot of Muslim children, and like they're feeling that tenfold. And I think like I really worry in kind of current teenage young Muslims, because that's such a like disenfranchising, like disorienting experience to grow up with, like seeing every time they open their phone, they're seeing like the mangled bodies of Palestinian children, and then at school they're not allowed about it. The government is saying protesting about it is like extremism. There's no outlet for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think like I really fear for what that does to them on like a mental health level, on I feel like it's a massive safeguarding issue in schools that we've got these children dealing with such complex feelings, and they have no outlet, because if they talk about it, then they could get to prevent for being, radicalized. And I think everything we're feeling adults, like, I can only imagine what feeling that whilst just going through your normal teenage issues anyway. It really worries me, the next generation.
Yeah, absolutely. It is really scary. I mean, I guess the only thing we can continue to do is to do the good work and to hope that we're able to create spaces where conversations can happen that can give some sort of closure and like just help people to also just process what they're going through. If there is not much else that we can do that will impact things politically, but I think so long as we're continuing to keep our spaces alive and we're continuing to keep our identities alive and to have these conversations. And speaking about identity, actually, you also write in the book about representation in media, and you make a reference to the character of Shabnam from EastEnders, which I really enjoyed reading about, because I think I've never read about Shabnam before. I remember when she came onto the show, because that family was an absolute mess. And they said, I remember my sister saying at the time, like, oh, but they've done lots of research. They said this can be really good Muslim family. Well, this is not the one. What are your thoughts on representation in media and public spaces? Because obviously we're seeing more people that are Muslim or brown or black, like we're definitely seeing it. But what do you think about how like positive or how good that representation really is?
I mean, I might sound like a harsh critic here, but I think it's all quite bad. I really struggle to think of one character in like a film or TV show who I felt like I'm really happy with their representation.
Yeah.
There's always, like, when it's Muslim women, and that's why I talk about that opening scene of Bodyguard. I don't know if you saw Bodyguard. It was just so typical of how we're portrayed. Like, at first she's this meek, like, victim of her terrorist husband, and she's been like strapped with a bomb and forced to like blow herself up because her husband told her to. So then that's like ticking all those boxes of like Islamophobia. And then it turns out that actually she's the terrorist mastermind, and she was just using that to make them think she's a victim, but actually she's the terrorist. And then I was like, that shows how that duality of like we're either a victim or we are a terrorist in disguise.
Yeah.
And I think all portrayals of us on TV and in films, they're always something like that. Like, there's always either we're having some kind of crisis with our faith, with our hijab, or there's a secret white boyfriend somewhere, or our parents are really controlling, and there's always something. And obviously, Muslim women are not a monolith. Of course there are Muslim women who have those scenarios going on in their lives, but I think it's really telling why they're the ones that get portrayed. And there's never, that I can think of, and I think I seek out, like, when there's going to be a Muslim something, I seek out trying to watch it, and I can't think of anything where she's just been like fine about her faith. Or even like, I think that program We Are Lady Parts, I think it's called, on Channel 4, that got a lot of praise from Muslim women, and it's about like a Muslim rock band, and it was written by a Muslim woman. But I just also found that, if I'm honest, quite problematic, because I think Muslim women always have to be like humanized to be like palatable. Like, why do we need to be like throwing around the F word and like playing the guitar and like doing all of that stuff to make us humanized enough to the British public that we're allowed on the screen? Can't we just be like ourselves? Like, I think like maybe in books we're doing slightly better. So like writers like Layla Abu Layla and Irish Hussein, I think we get like well-rounded, proper Muslim characters in their books. And by proper, I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I just mean like that they're just like your normal practicing Muslim who's not like desperate to leave Islam, or not desperate to like, or like a lot of the time in TV, there'll be a practicing Muslim, and then suddenly you'll see that they're like, there was one show, I can't remember what it was called, but she was like working for like MI5 or MI6 or something, and I'm just like, come on, like, or there's always something, like they're in the army or they're in the police, like there's always something that they do to make it palatable. And we never get to have our own story.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like at least like in TV, I don't think I've ever seen a Muslim character that I feel like is, like you say, kind of just like normal.
Yeah.
We don't ever see a sort of like a nuanced perspective where the character is really that likes their faith and likes their community.
Yeah.
They're always at odds. They always either want to go clubbing and do it secretly, or they want to like they have a boyfriend, a secret, and he's a white boyfriend, and there's always that sort of like white saviorism is always creeping in.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating. But you're right, like literature I think is slightly better. Like I was just saying, you know, even like Sahar Mustafa's written that beautiful The Beauty of Your Face. Like I think there's some really interesting work being written. I don't know if we're ever going to see what we're looking for on TV, to be honest, and I've kind of accepted it, I think, but yeah. But I'm glad at least literature seems to be changing slightly. So what are you really hoping for the book? Like what has been your like ambition in terms of what you want people to take away from it as they pick it up?
I think I want Muslim women, like visibly Muslim women, to feel like someone has written on the page like how they've been feeling. And I think alhamdulillah, like some of the feedback I've got so far is that yeah, this is like what I've always felt and always thought. I've never seen it written on a page before, that's really nice to hear people like resonating in that way with it. But I also want it to be like widely read by white women in particular, but also white men, especially people who consider themselves feminists, so that they think about how their feminism excludes us, and not only excludes us, but how their feminism is built on our bodies, like built upon us being the victim or being their little project to save. So I want it to, in an ideal world, I want people to pick it up and change the way they view Muslim women, which I know is a big ask of the book, but I hope inshallah it can do that in some way.
Inshallah. And I just actually, that was going to be my final question, but I just want to say that you, in the book, you also talk about misogyny from within the Muslim community, especially from Muslim men, and the way that Muslim women, especially like hijabi women as well, experience that misogyny from Muslim men, typically uncles, but also young Muslim men. You know, in the way that some of them our mosques are not inclusive. And I know you've been asked a lot of times, because I've like had a look at some of the interviews that you've done, about whether or not you were worried about perpetuating stereotypes and kind of calling out your own community. And I just wanted to take a moment to say that, you know, when we love something, and I think this extends to people and communities, we have to talk about their flaws in order to encourage improvement.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's about, right? Like, if we don't acknowledge the problems within ourselves, we're never going to get better.
Mm-hmm.
If we're not calling out the uncles in our community that creep out Muslim hijabis and have ridiculously horrible views, they're never going to stop. And it's important to do that. I guess obviously there is a fear that there will be people that will read your entire book and will just pick up on that one issue and be like, oh, hey, look, she's calling out the men in her community and therefore, you know, all Muslim men are bad. That may well happen, but that's not what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And if that is what happens, then you know that person that picked up the book was never really willing to embrace and never really open to what it is that you're trying to say. So like, I don't know if anyone has said anything unkind or anything like that, but I really appreciated the fact that you were so open about it, because it is the experience of so many Muslim women. And yeah, sometimes we feel like it's difficult to call out your own when everyone else is already kind of like calling us out and trying to erase us and criminalize us. And it's very difficult to feel like you're adding to that. But we need to do that for the sake of progress, for our own progress, and to hold each other to account, because we have to protect ourselves and one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, thank you. I'm glad you were, yeah, because I was nervous about writing that because I wanted to get it right, and I didn't want to obviously be subjected to like people saying, oh, Muslim men were misogynist all along. Like, thank you, Nadeine, for proving it. I didn't want that, but I also didn't want, because I know I would be so frustrated if I picked up a book written by a Muslim woman and it just fed into all those stereotypes about Muslim men. So I really try to tread the line carefully, and like I really like how you put it, because it is out of love. Like, you love your community, you love your faith, you feel like protective over it, and that's why we want better for it, right? Because we don't want the next generation of Muslim women and men to be perpetuating the same things we've had to go through. Yeah, I hope that so far nobody has just picked up on that part and nothing else. So I hope that
well, I'm glad. And Nadeine, it has been so wonderful speaking to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It was so great speaking to Nadeine on the show today, and I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please do follow, like, and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a review, because it really helps. Thank you so much. Come and find me on social media. I'd love to chat.